You know, maybe this game just came at the wrong time. Although Villa haven't won in the blue quarter of Manchester since 2007 when John Carew and Sean Maloney found the score sheet. But Manchester City hasn't lost back-to-back Premier League games since 2018. Then you have all this uncertainty and anger, quite frankly, surrounding the Etihad to the point where the fans were booing the Premier League anthem. Kind of a strange reaction given that they may not be hearing it for a while if the punishment is as severe as it could be. The question for us Villa fans, of those two halves, which Villa team better reflects the one that is going to play down the stretch? Let's hope it's the second half team as we reflect on Manchester City 3, Aston Villa 1. Breaking news, Aston Villa's parent company V Sports just buying 46% of Portuguese Primeira side Vitória Guimarães for $5.5 million. I mean, that sounds like an unbelievable deal, but as I said to you during the MLS show I did a couple of months ago, there is value to be had in Europe, and Portugal produces players, in case you haven't noticed. This club in particular has a very good record of youth development in a very fertile ground for great young players. I'd like to see more of this kind of global expansion. Maybe one day down the road in MLS, but for $300 million for a club that hasn't kicked a ball in a league that's okay before you've even built a stadium, the metrics on that are night and day. So let's see if maybe this is a place where Aston Villa can find a diamond, or maybe they can place one of their current young diamonds in a different kind of environment, in a different style of league. Let's see if a pipeline can develop here. Great friend of the Holy Trinity show, Samir is actually now recruiting his mates to bring us video footage from either away games or at Villa Park so we could use it on this show. I'm calling them Samir's soldiers. In today's case, the very handsome Elam Malik and Tony Lightwood. These two chaps look well odd. And by the way, when the world goes Pete Tong, I'm going to run with Samir's soldiers. We will wear claret, and claret will be spilled in the streets. And by the way, the Etihad, beautiful stadium. This is going to be the best League Two ground by far. Imagine how buzzing this stadium is going to be next year when Wrexham comes for a visit. Ho-ho! So, Unai Emery loses his first away game as manager. It's 2 losses on the bounce, 3 goals for, 7 allowed. The 7 allowed will ring some alarm bells, but who would have guessed on Sunday that Callum Chambers would be in that starting 11, which improves the Tyrone Mings in the Aston Villa squad record. He's missed only 12 games since joining the club. Villa have won but 1 of those games. But listen, Manchester City losing back-to-back games in the Premier League and Villa winning back-to-back games in their third strip, it would have signaled the end of days and the impending arrival of aliens. By the way, if you like the third strip and you didn't get it, or any of the other training gear or first team kit, it's all on sale right now at the Villa online store. Go grab yourself some, fill your boots, and if you use the link in the description below, you'll actually be supporting this show. Now, some of you have asked how I felt about the comments attributed to Emi Martinez in the French press this week. Well, Emi, of course, he wears his heart on his sleeve. I could see him making those comments about wanting to play Champions League football because that's the kind of guy he is. Whereas Jack Grealish would let his agent do the talking on that kind of a matter. Here's my feeling on it. First of all, never ever fall in love with the player, and then you won't be broken-hearted. Think of them as merely livestock. They are commodities to be bought and sold. Buy them low, sell them high. And if, in the case of Emi Martinez, PSG is really serious about bringing him in this summer, well, then they can pay for Emi Martinez. Another way to stop having these kinds of conversations is by bringing in players that can help us achieve European football. And I really get the sense that with Unai Emery's vision, his ability to sculpt and to mold the current squad, but because of what he says, which is we must upgrade on what we have. If he can upgrade on this squad, and I could see Villa pulling off a couple of more sneaky, cheeky, early in the window signings like we've done for the last 2 years with Kamara and Carlos prior to this last window in the summer, and then before that Buendia, before the window really even opened. If we do that, if we legitimately upgrade this squad, we could start walking the Europe walk rather than just talking the Europe talk. It's odd and frankly surreal that here I am about to bemoan some of the issues and moments that led to an Aston Villa loss at Manchester City with this entire backdrop looming of serious allegations and ramifications against Manchester City for allegedly cheating. Cheating is a strong word, but what else do you call it if you circumvent the rules to your benefit and undermine the integrity of the competition in the process, and potentially for the better part of a decade? If the independent panel finds any or all of these allegations true, well, then the book has to be thrown at this club, and that could mean expulsion from the Premier League and then being forced to start all over again in League Two. And then what? What do you do with all those players whose values you've inflated and whose salaries you've increased? Only a handful of clubs in the world could take those players off your hands. I mean, it's an incredible story that's about to play out here, and you really wonder if the league and the independent panel have the stones to punish Manchester City. And it will also be interesting to know whether there will always be these tarnished asterisks next to every single achievement that has occurred over the last couple of years. Will City fans look back and still think fondly on those years, or will they be embarrassed and actually distance themselves? The glory hunter players and the glory hunter fans, what happens to all of them? They disappear is what happens to them. The reason why you are paying more for your season's ticket, the reason why Aston Villa has to add 7,000 seats to increase its revenue, the reason why it's harder to bring players to the Midlands of England, and when they do arrive for millions more than they were a decade ago, is because a club like Manchester City inflated the value of the market by allegedly cooking the books. There's been a lot of smoke circulating. It's time for the Premier League to prove there is a fire and extinguish it, and I realize the punishment is going to be severe. 100 allegations. If you tell the truth 99% of the time, you are technically a liar. And I'm sorry, but you cannot cheat the system and undermine the integrity of the competition. So, like society in general, football needs to go after the rich bastards who are getting richer every single year at the mercy of us low-life plebs, because they're doing it through coercion, through all sorts of corruption, and through skirting the system that you and I are following. It's time to catch them. It's time to punish them. And when they do, football could be shaken to its core. And I find it hard to believe that the Premier League would go after arguably its golden goose, the team that brings in a lot of viewership, which then inflates the TV value, if they didn't feel like these charges could legitimately stick. All right, let's get into it. The Holy Trinity show, which is the 3 key issues or moments that defined Manchester City 3, Aston Villa 1, starting with our key statistics. And since I've been doing this show, I don't think there have been more lopsided statistics than from this game. And the extra stat that I looked into was successful dribbles, which ironically Aston Villa got the better of. But everything else, expected goals, look at the difference. Shots, accurate passes, 6 big chances created, and almost 2/3 to 1/3 possession. But Villa had 9 successful dribbles for 69%, which is actually pretty good. I'm actually going to start with a very positive key issue, and that was John Duran. And I get that Unai Emery is doing everything in his power to insulate this kid from pressure and high expectations. But it's going to get increasingly more difficult to keep the Colombian out of the starting 11 based on what we're seeing in, I get it, a very small sample size, but he came on and literally within seconds closed down, got a toe on it, and that leads to the goal from Ollie Watkins. And by the way, Ollie Watkins, his 100th game in the Premier League, he has 34 goals and 11 assists. Do you know that's not bad? And then in the late stages, we saw glimpses of the Predator as he nearly made it 3-2. I'm not sure what I'm more impressed with in this sequence. A, that he played off of Ollie Watkins and got into a good position. B, how he cushioned and took the ball down. Or C, how he smacked it with his laces. Or maybe D, all of the above, because the way he dealt with this ball and the power he generated, goalkeeper had no chance here. This is 4 inches lower, or if he's maybe 2 yards farther back, from being an absolutely spectacular goal. And in these 2 moments I've shown you, we now see why Villa took a punt on the 19-year-old. Key issue number 3, Jack and Jacob. Sounds like a nursery rhyme. I must have watched this clip about 60 times, and I still can't tell whether there was enough contact for Jack Grealish to go down. Was his trailing foot clipped ever so slightly? Because if it was, that might be enough to unbalance him and make him fall over. The commentators on my feed were 100% convinced that's a stonewall penalty. Grealish was clever. He got himself between the ball and his opponent, and all he waited for was for Jacob Ramsey to bite, and then down he went. But then I found this angle of the incident on TikTok. And again, it's so hard to tell. Does that back foot move unnaturally because he's clipped? The problem is the embellishment afterwards, because whether it was clipped or not, what Grealish does here is embellish. And if we want to kick embellishment out of the game, VAR has to be strong enough to overrule this and then fine Grealish for diving. Now, Jacob Ramsey still could have avoided the situation by just being patient, backing off a little bit. We're late in the first half here and in an area of the field that is not necessarily danger. He had cover behind him, and I don't think Jacob Ramsey has yet benefited from Unai Emery's arrival. He's been too peripheral in the games that I've seen. He needs to be more engaged. He needs to mature. But this was still mastery of the dark arts. Such a tough time to concede a goal, and such a tough scoreline too. At 2-0 at halftime, you get the next goal, you're in business. 3-0, it's dusted. Unai Emery came out right after and said, there's no way there's a penalty there. Problem is the referee gave it on the field, which makes it so much harder to overturn based on the clear and obvious error rule. But you know, it was a terrible weekend for VAR in the Premier League overall. You had the Brighton Crystal Palace situation. You had Ivan Toney's goal for Brentford at Arsenal. You had Thomas Souček making a save for West Ham in his own penalty area against Chelsea. Howard Webb had to come out after and say, oh, we had some human error issues this weekend. Ouch! What has to change, frankly, is it's the rewriting of the laws at the IFAB level. These laws need to be so much clearer and so much more obvious. And you need to simplify the whole thing and understand again why these laws even exist. Are we there to watch good defending? No, we're there to watch goals. Give the attacker the advantage. If he's completely disconnected from the last defender, he's offside. The linesman can tell you that. You don't even need to draw the line. And for handball, how about making all handball infringements indirect free kicks anywhere on the field, unless you obviously stop the ball from going in your own goal? We know what that looks like. You could use VAR for that. You'd get some great set-piece routines in the penalty areas, wouldn't you? But that has to change at the IFAB level. It's the same two laws that have been screwing up the game forever. Offside and handball. Fix it at IFAB. Key issue number 2. Missing Mings. Tyrone Mings gets a lot of heat. We know this within Villa Nation. He's a very polarizing character, but the record without him speaks for itself. I mentioned it earlier, 12 games without 1 victory. And I was one of those really pumping the tires of Callum Chambers in preseason. I actually thought he was our best player in Australia, which in itself That should have raised some red flags. But there's a huge difference between being good in a mean-nothing preseason tour with being told at the very last second, hey, you're starting at one of the best clubs in the league, and yeah, I know you haven't played in eons, and we kind of told you you could move along and find another club. And I'm not going to blame Chambers solely for the 2-0 goal either, because I don't think he got a shout from Emi Martinez. That ball was headed straight to our goalkeeper. Why didn't he get a shout and just duck out of it? Unai Emery said as much after the game. He called it a communication error, which means at halftime he said, what the hell happened there? So until Diego Carlos comes back, we are very thin at center back. But we're still better without Jan Benderak, if you saw his own goal at Southampton on the weekend. And the number one key issue or moment that defined City 3, Villa 1, a set-piece setback. It's one thing to concede from a set piece. It's another to concede from a set piece a first corner inside 4 minutes. With this whole furor about the serious allegations against City going around, there is kind of this weird us against them mentality inside that stadium. I mean, Pep Guardiola actually went out and tried to play the victim card heading into that game. He got the fans all whipped up. They're defiant now. And what do? You concede less than 4 minutes in, and now you've got the crowd into it, which is exactly what Unai Emery would have told his players to avoid doing. Keep the crowd out of it. And because City is not a transition team, they're a control the game team, and they control 2/3 of the game, well, you don't have the ball enough, and they don't give up transitions enough for you to get back in the game. Do you know, I get tired of always hearing from the defensive pundits in the commentary crews, because so many of those pundits are ex-defenders, that goals are always the result of a mistake by a defender. It's a defensive lapse. It's a defensive mistake. It's never a great piece of play, lovely touch, nice piece of movement, trickery on a well-disguised set piece. No, it's always a mistake, and I don't agree with that necessarily. And in the case of this goal, first of all, Rodri, who was deployed completely without convention, classic Pep, putting him in almost in a midfielder's role, he does really well to release himself of the block with some coordinated help from his teammates. And he gets to the precise area of the penalty area where if he does make contact on a well-flighted ball, in this case by Riyad Mahrez, and it was perfect, then he's going to give the goalkeeper problems, which he did. And I don't think Emi Martinez is going to be happy with the role that he played after the contact was made. Not having the towering and steadying influence of Tyrone Mings certainly does not help in these situations, but I've said it often on this show, I'm not convinced about the hybrid method of defending set pieces. Hybrid meaning some zonal and some man-to-man, or in this specific case, a blocking approach where you get a cluster of players try to block the opponents from getting to those dangerous areas within the box. And Rodri's clever here. He uses his teammates. They've all worked on this. It's almost like a synchronized disbursement. And if you don't block and if you don't stay with the guy, well, if you're Boubacar Kamara, you're late. And by the time you're late, it's too late. I'd love to have a debate with several really qualified minds in the coaching world to extol the virtues of each system, either full-on zonal, full-on man-to-man, or the hybrid approach, and maybe even going back to the olden days when you had defenders inside each post from set pieces to allow the goalkeeper the freedom to go out. I think that would be a very interesting discussion. It's that time in the show when we review the categories that we follow throughout the years. Villa's away record at a top 6 team, VAR, it all suffered. 13 out of 33 points now away, but Ollie Watkins bags goal number 6 on the season, 10 between he and Bailey. Maybe Villa should have had a VAR decision go in their favor here, and they concede again from a set piece to go to -8 on the year. Still just 4 points out of a possible 21 against the top 6. Right up next, the Arsenal. And I don't know what happened in the game on Wednesday because of the time of recording this show, but what happens in that Wednesday clash, a monumental clash with the very City team we just lost to, that will have major implications, not just on the title race, but also on what happens at Villa Park on Saturday. And there's another storyline, of course, that not a lot of people have talked about here, and that is that this will be the first time Unai Emery will face Arsenal since leaving England. And you know he didn't leave England on the greatest of circumstances, probably unfairly. Do you not think he'll have his team ready to go? And don't you think that they'll want to be ready to go for him? I could see a fire and brimstone, blood and guts type response from Aston Villa in this game, and probably, if that's the case, might need some different players from the ones that started at City. I'm not sure if you caught this from Unai Emery last week, but not only did he distance the club from the European and top 10 places, he actually brought up membership in the Premier League as being a priority. And maybe he's looked over his shoulder and seen that the gap and the spread between Villa and the relegation places is not that wide, about 10 points. And there could be as many as 7, 8, 9, even 10 teams involved in the relegation scrap. It's a very unusual table this year. So a good performance and result against Arsenal would do wonders for confidence and for the credibility of the group. And there was some negativity creeping in the Leicester game, which is another thing that he brought up again, which is the connection with the supporters. And the problem with increasing your ticket prices is that you kind of do alienate a segment of your fan base that is usually the most loyal and passionate. Now you've got people who have higher expectations with those higher ticket prices. Ask Chelsea and Todd Boehly how that's working out. Extraordinary increases to the cost of ticketing at Stamford Bridge, and that has changed the climate and the atmosphere in that stadium. Now, my question going into this big Unai Emery derby with Arsenal, who have a shorter turnaround. Villa benefits from the schedule. Arsenal play Wednesday against City, have to play again on Saturday after Villa get the week off. Do you go with the players that came on in the second half at Manchester City? John McGinn for a little bit more bite, Phil Coutinho with a little bit more craft, and maybe even John Duran for the unknown quantity that he brings over Leon Bailey? Or do you go back and do you play safe? Because oddly, Buendia, Bailey, and Jacob Ramsey seem to play better at Villa Park, whereas on the road, they often go missing. Nothing was going to spoil my mood going into the City game on Sunday anyway, because my lads, my U14s, came from 3-0 down at halftime to win 4-3 on the weekend. A combative and emotionally intelligent performance. I'm so proud of these kids. Honestly, this has been the best coaching experience of my life. So when Villa went down 3-0 at halftime, I thought to myself, it couldn't possibly happen twice in the same weekend. I might have spontaneously combusted if it had, but imagine, what if Phil Coutinho's cheeky chip from distance dropped under the crossbar, or John Duran went crossbar down and in? You never know. This is what sport teaches us. You can never give up. You can never quit mentally. Until Arsenal, be well, be positive, be hopeful, and as always, up the mighty Villa.